I am doing my persuasive speech on something that is very controversial and has been going around in topics of conversation throughout the news, everywhere. Everywhere you look, there's something about it. And it was a whole lot more popular like 1 or 2 years ago, but why not bring it back up? So I am doing my persuasive speech on the Confederate flag. The Confederate flag should not be banned because it is neither racist nor offensive. The Confederate flag does not represent slavery. The flag was never used in the war, and there were even 3 different flags used for the South at the time. The only flag that was ever used in battle was the Confederate battle flag. The battle flag was never a national flag. Multiple armies would carry the battle flag into battle, therefore the Confederate flag was not brought into war. It is very important to keep in mind that the Confederate battle flag was simply just that, a battle flag. It was never a national flag, so how could it have flown over a slave nation or represented slavery or racism? Contrary to popular belief, the War of 1861 to 1865, also known as the Civil War, was not fought over slavery. The North was in a financial downfall, and something needed to be done. Sensing financial ruin for the North, Lincoln waged war on the South. The South fought the war to repel Northern aggression and invasion. Slavery was included in the war because of Lincoln's reluctance to admit that he was failing as an elected representative for his country. When the South started secession, Lincoln was asked, "Why not just let the South go in peace?" To which he replied, "I can't let them go. Who would pay for the government?" Both northern and southern states owned slaves, not just the South. Northerners owned slaves before and after the Civil War. Even a lot of the Union generals had slaves to care for them. General Grant did not want to give up his slaves, but the 13th Amendment set them free. When asked why he did not free his slaves earlier, Grant stated, "Good help is so hard to come by these days." The northern states outlawed slavery after the war due to the Emancipation Proclamation, but only outlawed them in the South, not in the North. And the North did not free their slaves until 1901 because Delaware rejected the 13th Amendment. Because Lincoln was embarrassed of the current financial state of the North, he brought slavery up and lied, saying that he would fight to free them. However, he did not free the slaves until the 13th Amendment came about, which was 36 years after the war was fought. Lincoln wanted all attention drawn to basically anything other than the fact that his country had an awful economy and did not have enough money. Originally, Lincoln was wanting to send all people of color and or freed slaves to the jungle of Central America to keep them out of the United States. Lincoln was a hypocrite that spoke about topics that only made him look better in the eyes of the people. He wanted people of color out of the United States. The African government would not allow the freed slaves back into Africa, and by this point, Lincoln was just fed up. The only thing that kept this from happening was his assassination. Most people think the Confederate flag was flown on the South's slave ships, but the South never had any slave ships. The North, on the other hand, had Union, Federal, and Yankee ships that brought slaves to America. The Northern ships and government were supplying the slaves. The South never did. These Federals were the ones that ended up crying the loudest about slavery. But without their ships, many of the slaves would never have arrived here. They made countless fortunes on the delivery of slaves as well as the products made from raw materials such as cotton and tobacco in the South. One of the reasons that people associate slavery in the South and the Confederate flag is because a lot of people do not know that slavery was just as big in the North. Slavery was so popular before, during, and after the war that people just automatically assume that the only problem that was going on at the time was slavery. Because of those reasons, people have latched onto the idea that the Confederate flag represents slavery, just because it was one of the many massive issues that were going on at the time. Some individuals grasp onto the concept of slavery and do not realize that it was just a normal way of life at that time. It was a common thing to do during that time period. Yes, slavery is definitely a form of racism, but why is everyone blaming the South when the North had just as much to do with slavery and had just as much racism, and they were the suppliers of the slaves? At some point in time during history, most everybody's family has been enslaved one way or the other. What good does it do to complain about something that ended in the United States over 100 years ago, especially when it is part of a history that has helped shape our country to what it is today? People do not realize that slavery is still prominent in other countries and cultures all around the world. Nobody can change the past. It has been a century since African Americans have been enslaved in the United States. There are bigger problems to worry about right now than something that ended over a century ago. The point here is not to forget about the past and what has happened, but to realize that we cannot go back and change history, especially trying to and succeeding in banning a flag that does not represent slavery and was only one of the 3 national flags. The flag that so many Americans gave up their life during the war to fight for their nation, that flag represented. It is the same concept with the United States flag. So many people have fought in the name of that flag to keep their country safe, and there's a sense of pride that comes along with that. Taking away the Confederate flag is like taking away a sense of identity to a lot of people. What if it was your husband or dad or brother or any family member that was sent off to fight for the South, and after their life was put in danger or possibly lost their life, the same flag that represented the nation that they were fighting for was banned, all because of a rumor that the Confederate flag was racist and represented slavery, when it clearly does not. The Confederate flag represents the Southern nation, which is home to half of the United States population. Next time you see or hear someone that is talking about how the flag is racist, think of all the ones that have lost their lives defending their country because Lincoln failed as a president. You will now know how to respond when someone says something negative toward the flag, because you now know the truth of this wonderful part of the United States history. Banning the Confederate flag is pointless because it is neither racist nor offensive, and it does not represent slavery. Only the Confederate battle flag was ever used in battle, not the Confederate flag. The only thing that the battle flag was used for was being carried in battle. Because the battle flag was never a national flag, how could it represent a slave nation or support slavery or racism? The flag reminds us of all the lives that we lost during the war, and we should be proud to say that flag is a part of our nation. The battle flag that was flown during the war was representing the Southern nation, not the slaves that we had. The North had just as many and or more slaves. So the amount of slaves that we had and the flags that we had flown has nothing to do with each other. They don't correspond in the least. The all Confederate flag, all the Southern state flags represented the Southern states.